Emmerdale spoilers tease that the wind whistles through the broken windows of Joe Tate's grand mansion, as an envelope lies taunting him on an antique mahogany desk. Flickering candlelight revealed bold, red lettering scrawled across the front. "Everything you built will crumble unless you pay." Joe's breath hitched at the sight. His home, once impregnable, felt suddenly vulnerable. Each creak of the floorboards echoed like a phantom threat. He circled the note with trembling fingers, mind racing through every ruthless deal he had brokered, every life he had trampled to secure power. Who had the courage to extort him? Before he could draw a conclusion, the door behind him slammed shut. A sharp pain exploded at the base of his skull. Darkness consumed him. When Joe regained consciousness, his vision swam in sterile whiteness. He blinked against the bright glare overhead, the scent of antiseptic stinging his nostrils. As his senses sharpened, he realized he lay strapped to an operating table, heart monitors beeping a frantic rhythm beside him. Panic clawed at his throat when he recognized the gaunt face peering down at him. Dr. Crowley's hollow eyes glinted with morbid fascination. "Welcome back," Crowley intoned, voice smooth but chilling. "I trust you enjoyed your nap." Joe's pulse thundered. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt heavy. Memories crashed through him, the extortion letter, the ambush in his own home, the blow to his head that stole his freedom. Dr. Crowley circled the table like a predator inspecting prey. Poor Joe. Always thinking he's untouchable. He produced a syringe from his coat pocket. "Soon, you'll understand exactly how it feels." He held it aloft, the needle glinting in the harsh light. Joe's nostrils flared. He strained against his restraints, adrenaline surging. "You won't get away with this," he rasped. Crowley's thin lips curled. "I've already gotten away with it. Just like I got away with taking your lawyer's kidneys last year." He never saw it coming. The words hit Joe like a physical blow. He remembered the news reports, an anonymous victim, organ failure, a death-ruled misadventure. Joe's own greed and secrecy had protected Crowley before, now he was trapped in the monster's lair, at the mercy of a man who viewed life as a disposable resource. "What do you want?" Joe forced out, every muscle trembling. "Justice," Crowley replied quietly, leaning so close that Joe could feel his cold breath. "You made me, Joe. You built an empire on the suffering of others. Now I intend to return the favor." Crowley tapped the needle against the palm of his hand. "But first, let's negotiate. Tell me, how much is your life worth? And what about your wife and child?" His tone turned playful, as if discussing the weather. "I'd hate to see them suffer for your transgressions." Joe's mind spun. From his pockets to his secret offshore accounts, he calculated what he could surrender. But Crowley's grin widened, revealing that he held all the cards, including Joe's darkest secrets. As Crowley turned to consult his instruments, Joe's strained gaze darted around the room, glass cabinets lined with surgical tools, cages that once held contraband victims, a single camera lens recording every moment. His heart pounded with dread. He realized that beyond his own fate, the lives of his wife, Andrea, and their young son, Thomas, were dangling by a thread. Crowley's footsteps receded, leaving Joe alone with the pulsing machines and his racing thoughts. The letter's warning had been only the beginning, a prelude to torment. Now, cornered by a man who delighted in exacting cruelty, Joe recognized the stakes. To survive, he would need to outwit the very monster he had underestimated. Unknown to the rest of Emmerdale, a silent war had begun in the shadows. Joe Tate's empire faced its deadliest threat yet, not from boardroom rivals, but from a surgeon whose vengeance knew no bounds. Every passing second edged Joe closer to a devastating choice: sacrifice everything he held dear, or become another victim on Dr. Crowley's cold operating table. In the days ahead, alliances would fracture, secrets would surface, and the man who had feared nothing would discover terror the likes of which he had never imagined. Dawn crept through the narrow slits of the basement window, casting pale streaks across the cold concrete floor. Joe Tate lay motionless on the operating table, his body aching from the restraints that held him fast. Every muscle throbbed with pain, each breath a reminder of the desperate situation he now faced. Somewhere above, Dr. Crowley moved with precision, calculating, merciless, turning his torment into a clinical experiment. Hours passed in a blur of fear and anticipation. Crowley's sinister voice carried down the corridor. "Tonight, Joe, I'll start the treatment. But first, you'll tell me what I want." Joe's heart pounded. He strained his skull to remember every detail of Crowley's illicit organ trafficking ring, names, dates, locations, anything that could buy him more time. Yet to speak too freely would betray his allies and loved ones. Gathering every ounce of defiance, Joe rasped, "You'll get nothing from me." His voice cracked, but his eyes burned with resolve. A hollow laugh echoed. "We'll see." Crowley appeared at the end of the table, ominously calm. He tapped a digital recorder. "This is our starting point. Every confession is recorded. Make the right choice, Joe, or we play this for your wife and child to hear as they bleed." He fastened electrodes to Joe's temples. The monitors beeped in alarm. "Let's begin." A sudden surge of electricity jolted through Joe's body. He convulsed against his restraints, agony radiating through every nerve. Sweat beaded on his forehead as Crowley observed the readings with detached interest. Joe fought to suppress a scream, tears burning in his eyes. When the current stopped, he collapsed in spent silence. Crowley stepped back, arms crossed. "Now, tell me about the offshore accounts you hid. How much did you siphon from innocent investors?" Joe forced words past his cracked lips. He uttered partial truths, naming empty accounts and long-closed shell companies. Crowley listened, adjusting the voltage. With each lie, Joe risked exposure. With each truth, he handed Crowley ammunition. Time slipped away in a haze. Crowley's sadistic interrogation stretched on until the pain became a dull, unrelenting ache. At dawn, the doctor paused. "I'm impressed," he whispered, lifting Joe's head to meet his gaze. "You're tougher than I thought. But this is just round one. Next time, we'll add a new element. Maybe I'll sample your liver degradation, or see how you respond to controlled blood loss." He tapped the recorder again. "Until then, rest. We have much to discuss." As Crowley's footsteps faded, Joe felt the weight of exhaustion pressing him under. Yet beneath the fear, a spark of defiance remained. He knew that only by surviving and outsmarting Crowley could he protect Andrea and Thomas. Meanwhile, miles away at home farm, Andrea Tate awoke to an empty bed. Joe's side was cold, a stark reminder that he had never been the same since his empire's collapse. Her heart fluttered with worry as she dialed his mobile. It went straight to voicemail. "Andrea, I will call you back." She left a trembling message. "Joe, please pick up. I'm so scared." She tried calling again and again, but the line was always unreachable. Panic bloomed in her chest. She roused Thomas, still wrapped in a blanket, and whispered, "We're going to find Daddy." Thomas, sensing his mother's distress, reached for her hand. Back in the manor, security monitors showed no sign of Joe. His car remained in the drive. Andrea's mind raced. Could he have left voluntarily? But his abrupt silence felt ominous. She strode to the estate's manager's office, demanding answers. When no one could account for his whereabouts, she made a decision: she would contact the police. Detective Inspector James Barton took the call with calm professionalism. "Mrs. Tate, is there any reason Joe might disappear on his own? Any threats or business dealings recently? Andrea's voice trembled as she recounted the letter she'd found on his desk that morning. Everything you built will crumble unless you pay. D.I. Barton's expression hardened. That indicates extortion. We'll launch an immediate investigation. I'll send patrols to check his usual contacts. But I need to warn you, if his disappearance is connected to organ trafficking, the situation could be dangerous. Andrea's blood ran cold. Organ trafficking. She had heard rumors through her husband's whispered phone calls. Yet hearing it from a detective made the nightmare real. Miles below, Joe's consciousness flickered. Electricity crackled through the cables holding him to the table, jerking his limbs. Crowley had returned with fresh bandages and a surgical kit. Time for our next session, the doctor declared, eyes glinting with malice. As Crowley approached, Joe summoned his reserves of cunning. He noted the layout of the room, the stack of surgical implements within reach. He remembered the brittle silence when Crowley left. If he could just pry himself free, he could act during the momentary distraction, when the doctor prepared his instruments. Crowley clicked his gloves into place. Let us begin. He administered a sedative through and for. Joe's vision blurred, darkness seeping in at the edges. He focused on the distant hope of rescue, Andrea and Thomas fighting for him above ground. The thought anchored his mind as oblivion claimed him once more. Above, D.I. Barton was piecing together Joe's final movements. CCTV from the manor's entrance recorded an unmarked van pulling in at midnight, 2 figures dragging an unconscious man inside. Barton's instincts told him this was no simple kidnapping. He needed to move swiftly before Joe became collateral damage. At the same time, Andrea enlisted Victoria's help. Though bound up in her own surrogate journey for Sarah, Victoria recognized the urgency in Andrea's plea. With Robert's reluctant permission, Victoria set aside her medical appointments and accompanied Andrea to the local hospital morgue, checking against organ donor logs, but finding no sign of Joe's body. Their fears deepened. Joe was alive, but in the hands of a calculating monster. Late that evening, a breakthrough came when Mackenzie noticed a familiar license plate slip past the Woolpack. She recorded it and delivered the information to D.I. Barton. The plate traced to a decommissioned warehouse on the outskirts of Leeds. A grim skeleton of industry, the perfect hideout for an illicit surgeon's workshop. Inside the warehouse, flickering fluorescent lights revealed a cavernous space lined with surgical cubicles. Dr. Crowley navigated the corridors, humming softly as he checked his instruments. He paused at Joe's cubicle door and knocked. Time for your final lesson, Joe. Joe awoke to the harsh glare of lights, haze of sedative still fogging his senses. He tried to scream when he saw the scalpel hovering above his arm, ready to carve a donation artery. Then, the warehouse's front doors crashed open. A chorus of voices, Leeds police. Come out with your hands up. Crowley's head snapped toward the commotion. He backed away from Joe with a cold, dangerous calm. No one moves, he ordered, brandishing a syringe filled with an unknown substance. D.I. Barton stormed in alongside uniformed officers, weapons drawn. Andrea and Victoria watched from the doorway, relief and terror warring in their faces. Dr. Crowley, you're under arrest. Barton barked. Crowley's lips curved into a thin smile. Arrest me. He waved the syringe toward Joe. You'd kill my patient. Victoria stepped forward, voice trembling but resolute. That patient is a hostage. She scanned the scene, Crowley alone, armed only with needles, surrounded by officers. She caught Joe's eye and nodded. It was the signal. In an instant, officers tackled Crowley to the ground, securing his arms behind his back. The syringe skidded across the floor. Barton rushed to Joe's side, cutting the restraints with a medical knife from his kit. Joe slumped into his arms, exhausted but alive. Outside, fresh air filled Joe's lungs like a balm as he was helped into an ambulance. Andrea rushed to his side, tears streaming as she embraced him. Thomas climbed into the back with police escort, clutching his father's hand. In custody, Crowley's expression remained eerily calm as he was read his rights. The evidence: recorded confessions, hospital records of organ theft, and now eyewitness testimony, would ensure his conviction. Back at home farm, doctors treated Joe's injuries. As he lay in a private room, Andrea and Thomas by his side, the reality of survival settled over him. He had faced death by the hands of a man he had helped create, and lived to tell the tale. But Joe knew his empire had changed forever. Trust was shattered, alliances had to be rebuilt, debts repaid. Yet in the warmth of his family's embrace, he found the will to start anew. For now, the darkness had passed, but the lessons of Crowley's torture would linger, a grim reminder that power built on cruelty invites monumental reprisal. Over the following weeks, Joe's convalescence at home farm was swift yet haunting. Though his flesh healed, the specter of Crowley's torment clung to his mind. Each knock on the door, a nurse with antibiotics, Andrea with fresh flowers, stirred memories of the basement's cold horrors. But for Andrea and young Thomas, seeing him alive was a balm beyond measure. Private consultations with psychiatric specialists began as soon as Joe was stable. He sat stiffly in a plush armchair, fidgeting with his cufflinks as Dr. Linfield, a specialist in trauma recovery, gently probed the edges of his horror. "Flashbacks are normal," she assured him, voice calm. "We'll work through the triggers, so you can rebuild your sense of safety." But Joe, ever stoic, only nodded. His empire of coal, property, and influence now felt fragile, a house of cards that threatened to collapse with the slightest breeze. Meanwhile, life in Emmerdale pivoted around Joe's spectacular rescue. The villagers, once united in envy or contempt, now viewed him with cautious sympathy. Headlines in the Dale's Gazette proclaimed, "Joe Tate, kidnapped and tortured, survives against all odds." Yet in the boardrooms of Tate Enterprises, disquiet reigned. With Joe absent, power-hungry executives eyed one another warily, and legitimate transactions slowed under the weight of uncertainty. D.I. Barton's investigation moved swiftly. Crowley's indictment papers catalogued not only Joe's extortion, but a catalogue of organ trafficking crimes across Yorkshire. At the Old Bailey, crowded gallery rooms watched as Dr. Crowley, pale and composed, stood sentencing day ready in his tailored suit. Andrea attended, visage impassive, while Joe watched from a secure video feed, trembling as Crowley's sentence was read: life imprisonment without parole. A collective exhale filled the courtroom. Justice, at last, had been served. But Joe knew the price. His reputation was in tatters, his financial statements under regulatory scrutiny, and his philanthropic facade shattered. To restore his name, he needed a plan more ruthless than any boardroom merger. In the antiseptic quiet of his study, he drafted press releases, charitable initiatives, and community outreach programs. At the top of the list, a scholarship fund for organ donation research, named for the anonymous victims of Crowley's crimes. At Victoria and Robert's home, news of Joe's survival and Crowley's conviction rippled through their surrogate journey. Victoria, now in her third trimester carrying Sarah's child, wept with relief when she learned of Joe's fate. "He deserves a second chance," she told Robert softly. He nodded, squeezing her hand. "Your strength saved him, just as his helping Sarah." Their shared empathy tightened the bridge between the two families, forging unlikely alliances across old rivalries. Moira Dingle, still mourning Nate, visited Joe at home farm one evening, bearing a dish of homemade stew. She found him in the solarium, gazing at the twilight sky. "I lost my brother," she said quietly, kneeling beside his chaise longue. But watching you fight for your life reminded me that grief isn't a competition. Joe turned to her, gratitude softening his hardened features. Thank you for everything. Despite reconciliation offers, some wounds ran deeper. Mackenzie, who had risked her life to save Joe by tipping off D.I. Barton, found her relationship with Kane tested. Kane, grateful yet guilt-ridden that he hadn't discerned the kidnapping sooner, threw himself into protecting the pub and expanding its patronage to cover the Tates' mounting legal fees. Mackenzie supported him, her loyalty to the Dingle Pollards unshaken, but the memory of the crisis lingered, tempering her usual warmth with a cautious vigilance. At the Woolpacks' back room, Charity convened an impromptu strategy meeting with Victoria and Andrea. The table, once littered with fertility charts, now held PR agendas and legal briefs. Charity, her eyes sharp with determination, outlined a joint campaign: support groups for trauma survivors, funding for safe harbor homes, and an annual Emmerdale gala to raise awareness for organ trafficking victims. We turn his nightmare into hope, she said, voice unwavering. Victoria placed a comforting hand on Andrea's. This child I carry, she'll grow in a world that fought for justice. Andrea smiled through tears, imagining her son's father forging a new legacy built on redemption. Publicly, Joe resumed his duties as chairman of Tate Enterprises with careful precision. Board meetings transformed into intimate gatherings, where Joe personally thanked each executive for loyalty. He disclosed the Crowley ordeal, emphasizing the company's vulnerabilities and his commitment to transparency. Analysts, once predicting a hostile takeover, revised their forecasts as Tate Enterprises stock stabilized. Yet behind closed doors, Joe wrestled with darker impulses. His instinct for vengeance against those who enabled Crowley's crimes, whether crooked lawyers, apathetic regulators, or bribed officials, gnawed at his conscience. He compiled dossiers, hinting at leverage he could wield. Andrea found the files hidden in his desk and confronted him. Revenge will destroy you again, she warned. Joe met her gaze, torn between retribution and redemption. In that moment, he chose her path, to channel his resources into healing rather than hurting. As spring blossomed across the dales, Sarah Sugden visited home farm with Thomas at her side. The new life in Victoria's womb, a symbol of hope, returned. Joe, moved by Sarah's gentle strength, embraced her and whispered gratitude for her surrogate sacrifice. In her eyes, he saw not pity, but partnership, a reminder that survival was not enough, they would rebuild together. On the day of Victoria's final prenatal appointment, before the hospital birth, Joe and Andrea accompanied her to the same clinic where his torment began. The trio held each other's hands as the sonographer revealed the unborn child's healthy progress. Joy mingled with poignant remembrance of the ordeals that had brought them here. Later that night, under a canopy of stars, Joe and Andrea walked the fern-lined path behind home farm. Thomas in his arms, Joe leaned into Andrea's warmth. I thought I was invincible, he confessed, voice barely above the whisper of leaves. But Crowley showed me how fragile we all are. Andrea kissed his forehead. And you chose to be better. That's what makes you strong. Unseen by them, in the shadowed outline of the barn, Kane and Mackenzie stood watching. Kane squeezed Mackenzie's hand, relief and cautious optimism in his eyes. Emmerdale's never been more unpredictable, he murmured. She nodded. But as long as we stand together. As dawn approached, the village of Emmerdale stirred to life, each household marked by its own scars and triumphs. Joe Tate's empire, once built on ruthless ambition, had been tested by cruelty and emerged tempered by compassion. In the chapters yet to come, he would learn that true power lies not in dominion over others, but in the capacity to heal old wounds and foster new beginnings. And for Joe, Andrea, Thomas, Sarah, Victoria, Robert, Moira, Kane, and Mackenzie, the future shimmered with the promise of renewal, born from the darkest of trials, but gilded by the enduring strength of the human spirit. Months later, as summer's warmth settled over the Dales, Home Farm buzzed with quiet excitement. The day had come for Victoria to be induced, and the farmhouse brimmed with anticipation. Andrea and Robert flitted about, one arranging fresh flowers, the other double-checking hospital bags, while Joe stood by the window, his reflections superimposed on the rolling fields. The air was thick with hope, each heartbeat a promise of renewal. In the snug guest suite, Victoria rested on the bed, Thomas clinging to her side. His small hand clasped hers, unspoken concern shining in his wide eyes. Victoria gave him a reassuring smile, her own nerves soothed by the rhythmic pulse of the hospital monitor strapped to her belly. Sarah paced the room's edge, her hands clasped in prayer. She had weathered storm after storm to arrive at this moment, the birth of the child she could never carry, delivered by the love of her cousin. Moira arrived, carrying steaming mugs of herbal tea. She joined Sarah in a quiet moment by the window. "It's strange, isn't it?" Moira whispered. "How joy can flower from such darkness." Sarah nodded, tears glinting. "It's the village's miracle. And hers, the miracle she shares with us all." Down the hall, Kane and Mackenzie gathered in the corridors, bracing themselves for news. Mackenzie's hand trembled as she gripped Kane's arm. "I've never been more nervous," she admitted. Kane kissed her forehead. "She's strong. Just like her mother." At precisely 9 o'clock, the birthing suite lights brightened as medical staff wheeled Victoria into the delivery room. Joe escorted Andrea to the observation area, where they settled into 2 comfortable chairs, their hands entwined. Andrea exhaled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We did it," she murmured. Through the doors, muffled sounds of labor echoed, Sarah's whispered encouragements, Victoria's determined breaths. Joe closed his eyes, recalling the horror he had endured, and breathed in gratitude for this second chance. He glanced at Andrea, whose radiant smile banished every lingering shadow. 40 minutes later, a gentle cry cut through the tension. Sarah emerged first, her hands gloved, to cradle the swaddled infant. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she held her daughter for the first time, pink, squalling, perfect. Victoria followed, collapsing into Sarah's arms, both women overwhelmed with emotion. "I can't believe she's here," Victoria sobbed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Sarah kissed her cousin's cheek. "Thank you. You've given me more than I can ever repay." Their embrace spoke volumes, unspoken bonds forged in sacrifice and love. In the observation area, Joe and Andrea rose at the sound of Sarah's wails. They rushed forward as nurses emerged. Joe's heart thundered as he saw Sarah, victorious and luminous, rocking her baby. Andrea stood behind him, eyes filled with tears. "She's beautiful," Andrea whispered. Joe nodded, pulling Andrea close as they watched Sarah and Victoria together, a tableau of hope reborn. Later that afternoon, the new family convened in the nursery that Victoria and Robert had prepared. Soft pastel walls, a mobile of wooden lambs spinning above the crib, every detail spoke of fresh beginnings. Sarah, still flushed with motherhood, placed her daughter in the crib and turned to Joe. "I wish you could see her dream come true," she said softly. Joe knelt, placing a hand over his heart. "I was a fool to take life for granted. But now, I understand." Tears brimmed in his eyes. "Thank you for letting me be part of this." Sarah reached through the crib bars, taking his hand in hers. Outside, the summer sun bathed Emmerdale in golden light as villagers gathered on the green. A banner reading, "Welcome Little Sugden," fluttered between 2 birch trees. Kane and Mackenzie stood near the Woolpacks picnic table, mugs of cider in hand. Moira and Robert joined them, and together they watched as Joe, Andrea, and Sarah emerged from home farm, baby in arms. The crowd cheered, applause rippling like waves. Charity had organized the celebration, transforming the green into a festival of unity. Stalls offered homemade pies, lemonade, and cakes shaped like tiny footprints. Faint strains of fiddle music drifted from the marquee where musicians tuned their instruments. Even the sun seemed to smile on these unlikely family and friends. Joe lifted his daughter high, grinning as the villagers cooed. Thomas darted forward, wrapping small arms around his cousin's legs. Victoria and Robert followed, hand in hand, their eyes locked on the child who symbolized everything they had fought for. Amid the laughter and embrace, Joe felt his heart fully restored. Later, as dusk painted the sky in hues of lavender, Joe gathered the group around a low stone wall. He stood, clearing his throat, while Andrea placed their son on the grass beside him. Sarah held her daughter close, Victoria by her side. The crowd hushed, expectant. Joe spoke, voice steady. I once believed power meant control, and that success came at any cost. But I was wrong. True power is in compassion, in the bonds we forge when life seems broken beyond repair. Tonight, we celebrate not just a birth, but the resilience of our village, and the unbreakable strength of family. He paused, sweeping his gaze across familiar faces. Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. This is our story of redemption, and it's just the beginning. A cheer rose, and torches flickered to life around them. Faces glowed in the firelight as music swelled. For Joe, Andrea, Sarah, Victoria, Thomas, and the entire Emmerdale community, this was the moment when darkness gave way to dawn. In the years to come, trials would come again, but they would face them together, fortified by the hope they had ignited this summer evening. As the music carried them into the night, Joe held Andrea close and whispered, whatever comes next, we will endure, together. And in that promise lay the true legacy of Emmerdale's newest generation, born from sacrifice, tempered by trial, and blessed by love.